American conspiracy theorist and former police officer David Paulides has been studying the disappearance of his countrymen for many years. Painstakingly collecting information and not trusting official statistics, he determined that in 1980, 150,000 citizens of the United States disappeared without a trace, and in 2015 about 900,000. Thus, the number of disappearances is constantly growing. And no one finds even the bones of these people. At the same time, the researcher made a truly striking and somewhat shocking discovery. Many of these individuals go missing in national parks across the country. There, people die under mysterious circumstances. According to Paulides, on average, 2,300 Americans disappear every day, and more than 1,000 of them evaporate in the air when visiting territories where environmental protection is strengthened. That's just vacationing citizens here, as it turned out, are very poorly protected. Rather, modern security measures do not guarantee people almost no protection from unknown forces and phenomena. The conspiracy theorist has repeatedly contacted the administrations of national parks and asked officials to comment on the situation. David was always told that no one was responsible for the visitors. Only one official agreed to meet with the researcher personally, but the bureaucrat demanded $1.5 million for providing information, and the former police officer had to refuse such a deal. Here are 5 of the most mysterious and frightening disappearances and deaths of Americans in the country's national parks. In this list, Paulides included those cases for which he could not find any logical explanation. Therefore, the specialist, based on the data collected over many years, believes in aliens, and in the experiments of the US government on its citizens, and in the movement of people in parallel measures. However, judge for yourself. The disappearance of little Alfred Bailey. Alfred Bailey, the youngest child from a large family, was only 4 years old at the time of the disappearance. In July 1938, he was walking with his parents and siblings along the river in Rocky Mountain National Park. At a certain point, the boy briefly fell behind the group, and his father turned to ask his son to go faster. But the child was already gone. Alfred didn't scream or run away, and there was no sound of water splashing if he suddenly fell into the river. Relatives began calling and searching for the boy, and one of them soon reached the nearest ranger house and called the police. When the law enforcement officers arrived, their dogs suddenly took up the trail and raced up the mountainside. They had to be stopped at an altitude of 150 meters because the police thought that the child could not climb here on his own. The search, which lasted several days, yielded nothing, and Alfred was pronounced drowned. The next day, 10 kilometers from this place were tourists who were walking at an altitude of 900 meters and suddenly noticed a small boy on a rock nearby, who soon disappeared from their sight. When the witnesses returned home and read in the newspaper about the search for Bailey, they immediately contacted the police. When they looked at the photograph of Alfred, they realized that they had seen him. The search team reached the new location in 2 days. Rescuers did not understand how the 4-year-old boy managed to climb the cliff. Unfortunately, no trace of the missing child was found on the rock ridge. The boy's father and mother believed that their son had simply been kidnapped. The disappearance of the photographer Charles McCullough. 19-year-old photographer Charles McCullough from Virginia loved to shoot nature and travel in his Volkswagen van. In late 1974, he inexplicably refused to use his favorite car and hitchhiked to Oregon, where he arrived early the following year. The young man went to the Crater Lake National Park, where he intended to capture photos of winter landscapes. Charles stayed with a friend who lived nearby. McCullough often stopped by the local store, and according to the clerks, he always looked puzzled and excited. On one of his trips to the park, the photographer disappeared. The friend of the missing person could not explain anything to the police. Charles's parents organized a search party, and they even had help from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. At first, no trace of the young man was found. Only 2 years later, a couple of tourists made the wrong path and ended up in an unknown canyon, where they came across an old backpack. It turned out that he belonged to McCullough. The search began again, and 20 kilometers away, the police found the body of Charles near the lake. Law enforcement officers could not believe that the young man made his way here through a 2-meter layer of snow. Some of his clothing was missing, but his jeans, socks, and shoes were still there. Experts examined the corpse and unexpectedly determined that these things were put on McCullough after death. It was as if someone had stripped the poor man, let him freeze, and after a while half-clothed the corpse. Expensive photographic equipment of the young man could not be found. Investigators concluded that he died because of the cold, but the family of the deceased was sure that Charles died under inexplicable and sinister circumstances, in which something supernatural was involved. The disappearance of pensioner Geraldine Largey. 66-year-old Geraldine Largey was an experienced traveler. In 2013, she went with her friend on a long hike through the Appalachian Mountains in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Large, which followed the path once taken by the writer Bill Bryson, was prepared for this event with all the care. 2 months later, the friend left Geraldine, as she was forced to urgently return home. Largey continued the journey alone, wanting to end her trip by meeting her husband, George. When the pensioner did not come to the meeting place at the specified time, her husband realized with a sixth sense that something was wrong and immediately organized a search for his wife. The elderly woman was searched for along the route she planned with helicopters, horses and dogs. This search operation was the largest in the history of the state of Maine. However, no trace of Geraldine was found at the time. Only last year, her body was accidentally discovered just 5 kilometers from the place where she started a trip with a friend. Of course, in 2 months, women then, in 2013, went much more. It turns out that later the pensioner turned and went back, very strange, but this is not the most mysterious thing about what happened. The American woman's body ended up in a bright orange tent just a 10-minute walk from the nearest hiking trail. Having a considerable supply of water and food, the woman spent it and then died of thirst. In general, it was on this month for about a month. Her legs were intact, which meant that Geraldine was able to get out of here. It was amazing that she had stayed there all this time, while countless rescuers were scurrying around a few steps away from her brightly colored tent, and for some reason they didn't notice the orange tarp at all. Moreover, from the notes that the tourist left, it appeared that she was lost and was in some strange impassable place where there is no water nearby, no way to get out of here. David Paulides is sure that the pensioner just got into a parallel dimension, and after her death, for some reason, she was thrown out. The disappearance of the Boy Scout Jared Negrete. In July 1991, a group of Boy Scouts climbed California's San Gorgonio Mountain. 12-year-old Jared Negrete, who was overweight, was constantly lagging behind his friends, at best trailing them, and at worst disappearing from sight. When the student was not seen for a long time, the adults became concerned and began to call the teenager. Then the entire group began searching for Jared, but to no avail. Negrete seemed to disappear on the spot. His body has not been found to this day. But the police found on the day of the scout's disappearance his satchel, which turned out to be snacks, sweets and a camera. It turned out that before the disappearance of the schoolboy took several mysterious pictures. Many of them were blurred, as if a teenager was trying to film something in the woods that was moving near him at high speed. These were the last moments of finding a child in this world. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss more videos of mysterious stories and photos. Check out this playlist and I'll see you in the next video.